All right, let's jump right into it. Today, we're tackling a big one: populism in Latin America. You know, it's this political force that just keeps showing up, shaping countries for almost 100 years now. So what we're going to do is break down its story, looking at three major waves.
So let me start with a question for you. Take a look at these three leaders. What could possibly link them? I mean, you've got Juan Perón, an Argentinian general back in the 40s. Then there's Alberto Fujimori, a Peruvian president of Japanese descent from the 90s. And finally, Hugo Chavez, the Venezuelan socialist from our own century. Think about it. Different countries, different decades, totally different politics. It seems like they have nothing in common, right?
Well, the one thing that ties them all together is this idea of populism. And at its heart, it's a political approach that basically splits the world in two. It's not really about left versus right. It's about the people, who are seen as pure and good, against the oligarchy or the elite, who are painted as corrupt and evil. And the populist leader, they step up and say, I am the only one who truly speaks for you, for the people.
Okay, so to really get how this all works, we've got to go back, way back, to the very beginning, to what we call the first wave, classical populism in the 1930s and 40s. You see, this first wave didn't just pop up out of nowhere. It really exploded onto the scene because the old way of doing things was falling apart. These traditional elite-run countries were just cracking under all this new pressure from industrialization and people moving to the cities. You suddenly had this huge new working class that was demanding to be heard, and they found their voice in these larger-than-life charismatic leaders, like Argentina's own Juan Perón.
And look, their appeal wasn't just talk. This is what's so crucial to understand. Leaders like Perón delivered. I mean, look at this. A 40% increase in real wages in just 3 years. Can you imagine that? That's not just a statistic, that's life-changing money. It's the kind of thing that builds fierce, unshakable loyalty.
But, and this is a huge but, here's the other side of that coin. This quote from Perón himself tells you everything you need to know. After he won, he basically said, "The people elected us, so the problem is solved." He didn't see his victory as a chance to govern within a democracy. No, he saw it as a blank check. The people's will, as he saw it, was now law. End of story.
So this is the fundamental paradox of this whole first wave. On one hand, you could say it was incredibly democratic. It gave a voice to millions of people who'd never had one before, expanding rights, even giving women the vote. But on the other hand, it was profoundly anti-democratic. These leaders attacked the courts, they attacked Congress, any institution that got in their way. And their opponents, they weren't just rivals, they were enemies of the people.
All right, so let's fast forward a few decades. The classical model eventually runs out of steam, but populism, it doesn't go away. It just reinvents itself for a new era. Welcome to the 1990s and the second wave.
Now, this new wave, what people call neoliberal populism, was born out of total economic chaos. I mean, just look at these inflation numbers. They're staggering, almost impossible to imagine. In Peru, over 7,000%. Your money was worthless overnight. And so leaders like Carlos Menem in Argentina and Alberto Fujimori in Peru basically became heroes because they were the ones who finally slayed that dragon, usually with some really harsh free market policies.
And a huge part of their appeal was that they were outsiders. Take Fujimori. He was the son of Japanese immigrants, and the old-school, mostly white elite in Peru made fun of him for it. But what did he do? He leaned into it. He turned that stigma into a source of power. His campaign slogan was genius in its simplicity: a president like you. He was speaking directly to everyone else who felt looked down upon by the establishment.
And does this sound familiar? We see that same two-faced dynamic all over again. The good side? They represented people who'd been ignored, like workers in the informal economy. They challenged the old, stuffy political class. But the bad side? Well, it was the same old authoritarian playbook. They went after Congress, they went after the courts, and they did everything they could to centralize power for themselves.
Okay, so all of that sets the stage perfectly for our third and most recent wave, the radical populism that really took hold across the region in the 2000s.
So what sparked this wave? It was a massive backlash against those very neoliberal policies from the 90s. People were out on the streets protesting against rising inequality, and there was this feeling that countries had sold out. This created a huge political opening, and right on cue, a new group of leaders emerged, and they had a ton of cash to spend, thanks to a global boom in prices for things like oil and soy.
And if you want to understand just how radical this new wave was, just listen to this quote from Hugo Chavez of Venezuela. "I demand absolute loyalty. I am not an individual, I am the people. I mean, think about that. The claim is now absolute. He's not just representing the people anymore. He is the people. So if you oppose him, you are, by definition, an enemy of the entire nation.
And you guessed it, for the third time, we see that same contradiction. Yes, this wave delivered new constitutions and more social rights. Poverty went down for sure. But at the same time, power became even more concentrated in the president's hands. They went after independent media, and they tried to co-opt or crush any social movement they couldn't control.
Okay, so we've looked at three very different waves with different economic plans, different ideologies. But it begs the question, how do they do it? What's the actual playbook they all seem to follow? Well, it seems to come down to a four-part strategy for connecting directly with their followers. First, they build political movements that are loyal to them, as a person, not to a party or an idea. Second, there's clientelism, basically using government jobs and resources to reward supporters. Third, they become masters of mass media, finding clever ways to talk directly to the people and get around their critics. And finally, there's the language they use, that constant framing of politics as a simple battle between good and evil, us versus them.
Let's just zoom in on that media piece for a second, because it's pretty brilliant how they do it. Each leader innovates with the technology of their time. You had Eva Peron using the radio to create this epic, emotional political drama. Then, Carlos Menem totally mastered television, turning politics into celebrity culture. He'd even play soccer with Maradona on TV. And of course, Hugo Chavez had his famous weekly TV show, where he talked for hours, setting the news agenda and making fun of his enemies, all while completely cutting out the traditional press.
Which, of course, brings us to the biggest question of all. Why? Why does populism endure? Why does this political style just keep coming back decade after decade in Latin America?
Well, it's definitely not by accident. Populism grows in the cracks of failing democracies. Think about it. When political parties don't seem to care about you, when the law doesn't feel like it applies to the rich and powerful, when your rights are just words on a piece of paper, populism starts to look like a pretty attractive option. It speaks directly to that feeling of being marginalized and humiliated. And this is key. It takes those very stigmas and turns them into a badge of honor, a source of pride. And so that leaves us with a really tough, fundamental question to chew on. Populism's greatest power, its real magic, is its ability to give a sense of dignity to people who've been pushed aside. But if that power depends on creating an irreconcilable enemy, someone to be defeated at all costs, can it ever truly coexist with democracy? You know, a democracy that needs you to see your rivals not as evil enemies, but just as opponents with a different point of view? That right there is a central puzzle of populism, and it's one that's still very much being played out.